What's going on, everyone? My name's Alex. That's my co-host, Eileen, and we are talking the Formula One Chinese GP. We are back after 1 week's time. It's race number 2. How was the weekend for you, Eileen? It was late nights for me.
It was late nights. I'm tired. I'm feeling like I need a full recovery. I feel like I raced this weekend. Like, I feel like my energy is depleted.
Honestly, this weekend was really a thing of roller coasters. Like, we had some really good excitement right on, and then it was a kind of a lull race, and then at the end of it, after everything was said and done,
A lot of drama.
So I think we kind of need to break it all down. Got to get into it.
Yeah.
Because going into the weekend, I was pretty excited. I was hopeful for a couple of things. You know, being a Lewis Ferrari fan, actually just being a fan of Formula One, I'm happy we're back.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yes.
and I'm also, we've kind of talked about this before, is we're also kind of excited that all these races are happening on the other side of the world right now. We're getting it over with.
Yeah.
Because last week it was a 12 o'clock race, and then this week was a 3 a.m. race,
And then in 2 weeks, it's a 2 a.m. race.
Yeah, for Japan. So I mean, let's just knock these out as fast as we can for us Americans. I know other places have other issues with other times too, but the start of the season is always a tough one for us, right? Yeah. So going into the weekend, I think we got to talk about what were any drama things that we kind of knew about. There was still talk about Liam Lawson kind of going into the weekend, but I think leaving it now is even more.
Poor Liam. I feel like, you know, at the end of the day, the second Red Bull seat it's been cursed. It literally has been cursed. Somebody has a voodoo doll for that second seat, and it's just cursed. Like, let's just put it that way. But obviously, you know, there's going to continue. I mean, we've seen it for years. The second Red Bull seat, there's been always a topic of controversy or just conversation around it. Liam didn't have a great first weekend, and it's like already the conversation is starting to swirl. So, you know, we had that, of course, coming in. We had, like, you know, what's happening with Ferrari? Was it a one-off? A lot of teams said that it was a one-off. Even the drivers, like even Lewis and Charles, like, dang, after one bad weekend, everybody's given up on us type of mentality.
Yeah, you did see a couple memes where, like, oh, the press conference now, like week 1, Lewis, the whole place was packed. Couldn't even get media in there. There was too many people. And then this week, oh, it's all over. There's only one photographer, you know, jokingly, but it was a meme that was created because of it.
It definitely was. So,
you know, another thing I want to think is, like, Haas last week, we were kind of dogging on a little bit. We were, you know, like, just like, what's going on with that?
The reality was, like, we didn't expect them to be the worst team, and they were by far the worst team in Australia.
Yeah.
Yes. So coming into this weekend, kind of expected a little bit of the same, but definitely far margin, way different. So Haas, I mean, they delivered. They came and they conquered.
I mean, look, Haas finished this weekend with two drivers finishing in the points for the feature race, the main race.
I mean, still not great qualifying, I think, because Behrman was obviously out in sprint Q1 and qualifying Q1. And, you know, obviously, I think this weekend for a lot of the rookie drivers, this is their first time at this track, you know? So going in, they only get the one practice, obviously, for a sprint weekend. So, you know, was it going to be another chaotic weekend?
I mean, and that's the thing. Speaking of a sprint weekend, I kind of like the fact that race number 2 is a sprint weekend. So it's like,
you're just in the
they're in of it. Yeah. And it's also a place that, like you just said, that a lot of these drivers have never been to because they don't do Formula 1 2 there. Yeah. You know, all we get is, I think it's a Porsche series that we don't even get to see on TV. And they do the Formula 1 Academy, right?
But this was the first year that Formula 1 Academy was coming to China. So this was new for them too. So, you know, a lot of new activity obviously happening.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So, I mean, just a lot of inexperienced drivers here on a longest track of the season. It's like 5 kilometers. It has one of the longest straights and has some of the hardest turns with multiple lines that these drivers can choose from. So yeah, I mean, adding that,
and the tarmac was freshly done.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. It was done last year, but then it wasn't done to the specifications of the FIA, and they made them do it again their specifications.
Some people liked it, some people didn't. So it didn't work out great for everyone. But and then there was, of course, like coming off of another rain, you know, craziness last weekend in Australia, there was talk again, is it going to rain? I think we just do that now every time as Formula One fans. Like, if there's a 1% chance, like, we're posting the meme and we're posting the weather that there's a 1% chance that it could rain.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I mean, even
they just want to start the drama.
Even in the race, guys, it was like there was talk at the very end there, like, oh, it could start raining with like 2 laps, 3 laps left.
Yeah.
And again,
Which would have been nice. I was kind of hoping that there was going to be like those last 3 laps.
a little spice in the game.
Yeah. Because you definitely would have seen a gamble where it was like, are people switching to inters or are they staying on slicks? And I feel like that could have really shook some things up. But unfortunately it didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't bring the rain. Bring the rain.
You're right. Because honestly, I think most teams, apart from maybe Lance Stroll and maybe one other people, were all going to do a 2-stopper for the main race, for the race. And I think
they were all going to.
It's all planned on that. And so I think there was a lot of things that go planning into a 2-stopper and trying to maintain that, but then realizing because of Stroll, and I forget who else was on a hard. I wish, if you guys know, can remind me who else was on a hard to start.
Behrman.
They stayed out longer. They proved that the hard tire was the right tire to be on for this particular race day and weather-wise, right, temperature.
Yeah.
And that caused 98% of the teams to go from a 2-stopper to a 1-stopper.
Yeah.
And it made them all change the game. So it kind of changed a lot of things.
Except for George Russell, who always loves to do a 1-stopper no matter what. Remember Spa last year? He immediately, like when they came in, he was like, this is going to be a 1-stopper. And they were like, we don't think so. And he was like, I know so.
Yeah. There was a lot of cockiness on some of the radios today.
Yeah.
A lot of little banter, even between like Charles and his guy.
Charles has been getting sassy on the radio lately. I'm like, it's kind of funny. They're like, hey, listen, try not going over the curb in turn 2. And he's like, how about no? Like, I'm going to do what I want and I'm going to drive how I want. And they were like, okay, copy.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I remember that one of those. I was like, ooh, all right.
Yeah. So it's pretty funny. I'm like that. And then of course, like we have a lot of drama, but if we're talking about radio, a lot of drama after the race. And so Fred Vasseur for Ferrari was talking about how they had requested, and the radio that was broadcast during the race was that the team requested for Lewis to swap positions with Charles. But in reality, Lewis had requested it prior to, it just wasn't broadcast. So Fred was like, I'm going to be talking to them because they're just making a mountain out of a molehill when nothing was really there.
Yeah, I mean,
Lewis was struggling and he knew it. And he's like, let Charles by.
We got to also remember this is entertainment too. And you got to take the broadcast with somewhat of a grain of salt that they're trying to elevate and make some tension because the race was a little boring. So trying to add a little drama to the race. And that's what they're doing. And you're right. They don't air all of the radio conference, all the radio communication between all the drivers and stuff like that. So you don't hear all of it. So it's snippeted.
Yeah, or it's delayed.
It's delayed.
Yeah.
And it's very much scripted in a way to go in a way. Yeah, it is, because it's up to these producers and directors to choose.
Well, yeah, they're listening and they're choosing, what's going to get like the most like drama, like what's going to get people excited, like, ooh, he's mad.
Yeah, and so it's like, do you just listen to the main broadcast and take it for what it is, or do you do now what they offer and you listen to multiple things and you have multiple people's radios up too?
Yeah.
And so you kind of understand if you become more into it,
Right.
Like.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be frustrated with things that are coming out and obviously spin a story, then of course, like, listen to the whole thing is probably what the message should be, but it's a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
Especially for us that are, most people when they're watching the race might be watching it on like ESPN, might be watching it on F1 TV. They're only seeing what's being broadcast or what's being chosen to be broadcast. So,
and there's definitely a different experience between what they're showing on ESPN, what they're showing on Formula One, and what they're showing on Formula One International. It's all a different experience. And even like, I kind of wish sometimes I could see what Sky Sports is seeing, because we're watching the international feed, for example, right? Because we like Crofty.
We've got to have our Crofty, but we don't know how to use it on one of our TVs.
Oh, yeah. But what I mean is that we're listening to the international feed, but we're watching the F1 feed.
Right.
So we're not getting all the cutaways.
Of course, yes.
That they get.
We're not getting the ghost graphics.
No, we have to see the ghost graphics in online, social media. We don't get to see that because that's a Sky Sports thing. And so we
don't have the red button.
Yeah, Crofty, what's up with that? Us Americans want to know, we get on a red button too.
We want to press the red button, okay?
That's funny.
Oh my God, yes. No, so I mean, there's a lot of different broadcasts, but essentially, there's always a little bit of spiciness, a little bit of level of spiciness, but it was interesting because at first, obviously, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, oh my God, like they're asking Lewis to give up and concede the position. But then post race, hearing that after, I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense, and that just goes to show, like, hey, let's let Charles go get him. But he also did say, if he doesn't catch the people in front, let's
Okay.
switch the cars back,
Yeah.
which they didn't.
Which didn't matter anyway.
Which didn't matter anyways because Ferrari is cursed.
Yes, they are cursed.
I'm convinced that we cursed Ferrari. Like,
Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's break that down
like,
a little bit.
what happened? So last weekend, obviously, I talked about, okay, listen, you know what? It's one off. We're still going to believe. Listen, and for me, okay, granted, this is the worst start Ferrari's had in, I think, like 16 years or something. But I'm not going to give up. A lot of people out there are not going to give up either. But it's not great. I mean, the two drivers are hanging on by the skin on their teeth. But obviously last week we discussed we've got a Ferrari flag flying out front. We also own a Mercedes flag. We also own a McLaren flag. But we've chosen to be fully immersed in Ferrari. And it didn't work out so well last week. Then I felt like it kind of worked out a little bit.
We had a solid practice and we had a really good qualifying for the sprint. And then we had a good sprint.
Yeah, for Ferrari. For Lewis.
For Lewis.
Yes.
Led the whole entire sprint.
Got his first win, got Ferrari's first sprint win.
Yes.
So
sprint pole, I think.
I think
maybe not sprint pole.
Yeah. But obviously his first, and we know it's not an actual pole position. You don't have to correct me.
Yeah.
But it's, obviously pole for the sprint, which is I think like the fastest, whatever they call it. Still gets a little award. Still gets
fastest
a little
qualifier.
Yeah. So, but he won. He led every lap, and he was quick. And Charles was quick during the sprint. Looked good. Came back. Was fighting at the end. Almost caught George. And then it was like that night something changed. Qualifying for the Grand Prix was completely different for them. Slower than they were in sprint qualifying.
They were. I mean, there was a couple of variables. The temperature was quite different. We heard Lewis talk that they did make some changes to the vehicle. Obviously, the changes after the fact.
Why do we make changes when
I think you have to. I think you learn a whole lot because look at all the other teams. They learned a whole bunch of stuff during the sprint, and they implemented it for qualifying and the race. And I would say all the teams definitely improved except for Ferrari, really.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if Ferrari wouldn't have gotten disqualified this weekend at the late on a Sunday.
Oh my God.
We wouldn't be talking about how miserable they were and how bad they are. Like they only have 17 points or something like that. They're tied for 17 points.
Right. I mean, they would have had a good haul of points, obviously. Charles, and Lewis.
Especially after the sprint with Lewis getting his 8.
Right.
Right. This weekend, then they would have got both of them would have gotten points. Yeah.
They would have. They would have been 5 and 6. So essentially, they would have got what is it, 10? It would have been like 20 points,
something like that.
A little bit more, but. And then they both scored points in the sprint. So it wouldn't be as far off. But, things happen. Did we curse Ferrari, Alex? I mean, I'm sure we're not the reason, but do we need to put the McLaren flag on?
You need to do a seance. We'll burn some sage.
I think we need to.
And we'll reassess coming into Japan in 2 weeks' time or whatever.
I'm about to we put the McLaren flag out and we just see what happens. Do we curse McLaren? Do I need to get a voodoo doll?
Oh, maybe. But speaking of McLaren, I mean, look, dominant, cars looking good. They fixed whatever. Well, you know what? Would have been able to beat Lewis on the sprint pole if
they qualified on pole?
If they would have qualified, well, yeah, sure. But if they would have put down good runs, because I think both McLaren drivers had issues on qualifying for the sprint.
Yes,
I know for a fact Lando did. In fact, his was so bad he was up, but then locked up.
Yeah, he did it in
He just went in the pit.
Yeah, he did it in qualifying and in sprint qualifying.
He did.
Where he aborted the lap. Like he just didn't finish it. So I think Oscar was on it all weekend. Like I think Oscar definitely was like out for redemption after last week. It was a tough race, home race for him. But I think without a doubt, if McLaren would have qualified where their car potential was, they would have won the sprint race.
I think so. I think they're still really the most dominant car, clearly. I think those two drivers, if they're driving good, they're the ones to beat right now.
Yeah.
They're I don't know what else to say other than Oscar Piastri looked really good today.
Mm-hmm.
He solid in the front, was having no issues.
Yeah, I mean Lando had bad sprint race.
He did.
Obviously, he had, he got out of position at the beginning because he locked up and like went wide and
I
got.
was like started 6th or something like that.
He started 4th,
Was it?
and then he ended up like in 6th. And really, there wasn't any overtaking in the sprint, with the exception of Antonelli, which he had a good sprint race.
He did.
Maybe that's why he was driver of the day today. It was like redemption. Who knows? Yeah. But I think that Lando is out of position. I think no one really knew like what was going to happen. The tires were falling off for everyone in the sprint, and they were all on mediums, and so that kind of should have been a sign going into Sunday's Grand Prix that the mediums were definitely going to get destroyed. Nobody really ran the hards. There's only one practice, or was anybody even doing the long run? So it was kind of like you said, it's a gamble going in, and then we had a couple drivers start on the hards. So I think nobody really knew, and so you don't want to push it when there's no pit stops in the actual sprint race. So interesting. But I do want to bring something up about McLaren.
Sure.
And this is going to be controversial, but there has been a lot of comments about it's, not just the car at McLaren that's good. It's the drivers. And there has been previous comments made in the past from Lando specifically that has said anybody that's in the Red Bull could be winning that world championship. Anybody that is in the Mercedes could be winning. But now that the McLaren is the dominant car, we're hearing a lot of, well, it's not just the car, it's the drivers too. So what's your take on that? Because Fernando Alonso actually brought that up today post-race.
Yeah, what'd he say?
He said the same thing. It's interesting that now it's not just the car, but Lando was bringing up that it was the car before, and anybody could win in that car. Dominant car. So.
Is he talking out of his ass? Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if it's like that, but I think too, when you're not in the dominant car, like you can easily say that it's just the car and it's not the driver, because it's obviously a combination of both.
It is a combination of both, and you got to look. Those were the top 10, for example, on a qualifying lap for Q3. They're all kind of within a half second, the top 10. So you're talking. Some guys are finishing this much farther ahead than somebody else. So,
oh yeah,
well, you're talking fractions of an inch, a foot of a difference between first place, second place, first place, and fifth place. Sometimes it could be this far, right? So, yeah, I think they're all top tier drivers.
And it was like less than a tenth in the top 3 for the actual qualifying for the GP. Same thing between 1 and 2 for the sprint qualifying. It's very close right now, so it's within margins.
Yeah, I think each car is kind of tailored to their drivers, right? Obviously, we're seeing it firsthand at Red Bull.
I was just going to say that,
right?
Yeah.
That car is made just for Max. Nobody else can handle that car. It's been proven for multiple seasons.
Yes, and I think that Max and Red Bull is the perfect example. That, I mean, obviously he won the Drivers' Championship last year.
Yeah.
By a pretty solid margin. He really rarely makes mistakes. We did see a few this weekend, which is unusual for Max, but I think obviously we're comparing him to, all of his previous teammates, including his current one, and he's just, always outperforming. Like, I'm not even kidding you, in the last 20 races, I think he's scored like 339 points, and his teammates combined have scored 40 points.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect example is, even last year, come up to summer break. I almost said spring break. Summer break, their car was dominant. And then after, it really wasn't. And Max was still winning. He was still, coming back. He was still putting in these dominant performances. So it is a combination of both, but it's easy when you're not in the dominant car to say that. And I think Lando's obviously feeling the opposite side of the situation now.
He is on the opposite side, but he's not realizing that the car is kind of tailored for him and the way his driving style is. And that's one of the reasons why the car is performing well, is because it was designed for him over these last few. How long has he been on McLaren? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he has a huge input on how this car is turning out.
Of course, yeah.
And so who's to say that a couple years ago when the Mercedes car was at full tilt, that if Max would have went in there, would have that car been suited for him? It wouldn't have been. It would have been suited for the way Lewis and Valtteri drive, right, or whatever. And would they have been struggling? Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I think Yeah, there's a top series of cars, the top 3 cars, and I think there's one that has a better balance. And currently, we're seeing the one being McLaren has a better balance on the way they would use the tires.
Yeah, of course.
You know, at the end of these regulations that we're kind of at right now, most of the teams are kind of here. Like, we're so surprised. I'm very surprised, at least, that Williams is as high as they are. I'm a little disappointed with how they kind of finished. Well, it was how Sainz finished this weekend, but like, the fact that
Still got the points.
the fact that Albon, you know, then they're still figuring out they're a smaller team, but like Albon got into Q3 for the sprint for the main race and like used his tires the smart way, because when they do have a sprint race, they're only given 13 sets of tires. Okay, and so how you use those tires is different, you know, because you only get one more set for a sprint race weekend than you do if you didn't have that, and it's kind of wild, you know. So if you play smart, you know, and they used their tires up and they had to.
Well, yeah, I mean, but he got into Q3, so he only had one set versus obviously like the top teams having
so
two.
Guaranteed still a top 10 start, which is a really good thing for.
I mean, what James Vowles, I feel like, has done there now that he has 2 dominant drivers. Obviously, Carlos is just getting comfortable with the team, but I mean, we're going to see some good things continue to come from there.
Yeah,
so.
I'm excited. I'd like to see Williams more at the front of it. Man, if they were in 4th place, that'd be so killer.
I mean, getting podiums and you know, competing, that'd be crazy. I think obviously this season, definitely, you know, obviously I think we're all kind of in agreement that McLaren is like performing the best, probably the most consistent, and they have 2 really consistent drivers who don't, you know, they've been with the team for a few years. So it's like they don't have really a lot to learn and like change, but they're definitely open that there is some problems that they're navigating through. And I think by circuit, it's always going to be different.
Yeah.
But, you know, Red Bull's got a new driver, Ferrari's got a new driver, Williams has new drivers, you know, obviously Aston Martin's the same, but they're struggling on the back foot.
And their focus is on next year already, because they, with the Adrian Newey deal and everything like that, they're focusing on that car. So I think they're kind of, they're going to be here. They're participating.
Yeah.
And you always have a driver like Fernando that wants to try to compete, although his brakes were on fire this weekend.
I know. And last weekend he crashed out. So
he's having a tough time. And, you know.
But I will say Stroll is definitely, you know, kind of outperforming. He's looking, you know, he's doing some overtakes today and there's some positive things coming out of there. But every other team has driver changes. And so I think these first few races, we're kind of navigating. We're going to see some things shake out. Of course, McLaren is capitalizing on how they can start.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a positive thing for them. They're definitely leading the charge.
Pretty good lead right now.
But I think, you know, there's gonna be an interesting season ahead. Like, I think we saw a lot of that towards the end of last season. I think there's gonna be some new people that maybe haven't won before.
I think you're right. I think even talking like Kimi Antonelli, if the cards play right, how good he's performing, who's to say he doesn't have a podium?
I mean, we know George Russell's definitely going to win at some point.
Let's talk about George a little bit.
Let's talk about George.
Because George now, for the 2nd weekend in a row, after 3 racing events, has always just found himself kind of just driving his own race in like 3rd or 4th place. You know what I mean?
He's like unbothered. Like, I would say, like, first of all, we have to say, qualifying for George, he has been producing some great laps and putting
2nd place.
Setting himself up into a great position. So I think, you know, the car is getting better. He feels comfortable with the car because he's been there for a few years. He's the lead driver. He's got something to prove. And he's proven it. He's doing a good job. But during the race, I just feel like he doesn't have a lot of challenge. Like, there was a little bit of it. And then, of course, during the sprint, it was a little bit closer. But he's kind of just like 4 or 5, you know, 3 to 5 seconds, just like in a window where he's like alone.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where I thought the end of the race was going to go this weekend. But we started hearing on the radio with Lando and his brakes.
I was going to say, it got a little spicy there.
Because if there was one more lap, I know for a fact George would have passed Lando because...
Well, Lando couldn't brake.
Well, so you started hearing Lando mention, I got a lot of range in my brake, you know, and started to get, it's long in my brake. It's long in my brake. And,
brake pedal's long.
And then the team said, we hear you, we understand, we know about it, everything looks fine, continue as is.
Yeah.
And for the most part, you could tell that he was continuing as was. And I know from my little experience on a racetrack that after, you keep doing lap after lap and you start wearing the brakes down, you're always going to have a little bit of longness. Like as the race goes on, the brake pad, your brake pedal might go from like here at the beginning to like here, right? So a little bit farther. But his was going, I think he started raising alarm bells.
Well, they told him 2 laps before the end that it was critical.
Yeah. So I think, how we take these like code words of critical, like I would say that's probably serious, where like we even now, then they cut to the national or the international broadcast cut to his onboards. And you could see that he was lifting and coasting. He was engine braking.
Oh, yeah.
And,
the gap.
George Russell was like 5 or 4 seconds back. And then just like all of a sudden, 2 seconds, 1 second.
Right. And also the gap between Oscar and Lando was like, I mean, he could have been challenging him, but then it ended up, I think, at the end of the race, like 7, 8 seconds.
I think that slight brake issue for the most of the race wasn't going to let Lando keep up with Oscar.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, it could have been a problem. Even Alonso post-race, obviously he was out because of his brake issue. He was like, listen, I mean, luckily we were going into a turn that like I didn't really have to do like we're already going slow enough.
I could say I was able to downshift and use engine braking.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas if it was a different turn, he's like, it could have been a huge crash. It could have been taking out multiple cars. So you never know what you're going to get. There could be mechanical failures that cause craziness.
Yeah. So and honestly, like
that's why we need to keep that in mind when we're going into a season. Like it's not over yet,
right? And based upon last year, there wasn't so many issues, but the year before that, and the year before that, there was all kinds of things. There's all kinds of crashes. We have a lot of rookies this year.
Yes.
So there are still things still yet to happen. We've only had 1 street race. We've had 1 now regular circuit. Mm-hmm. Let's just see once we start getting to Baku and we got into Monaco and we start getting these younger guys in some tougher courses.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. I'm still hopeful for Ferrari. I'm bummed about what happened. So if you guys don't know, both drivers were disqualified for different things.
Yes.
Charles Leclerc was disqualified for being underweight. So he was 1 kilogram underweight. And I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier is because I think they were planning a 2-stop, right? And that 2-stop means that those second tires would have had a little bit more rubber thickness on the tire. I've heard some other people talk about this, and I think that's to be true, right? And even though at the end of every race, most of the drivers go around and they pick up all the marbles and they try to add a little bit more weight to the dry stock or the dead weight of the car, right? I just think there wasn't enough tire thing on that carcass of the...
Yeah,
because it was only a 1-stop, so I think they wore the tires down more than they planned on, and I think that caused the 1 kilogram, because that's not that much. 1 kilogram is not that much, so that's a bummer.
Yeah, and obviously the wing too was a whole other thing, but they put a fresh wing on it to balance it out as far as that too.
Yeah, because that's how the start of the race.
Yeah,
and then Lewis, his was the plank, and this is not an issue.
This is the second time the plank has disqualified Lewis.
Yeah.
Different teams.
So, I mean, I think they're pushing and I've heard some other people say too, is because they only had 1 practice session. It was a sprint weekend. They didn't have enough time to really run the full simulations during practice to see how low they could really get the car. So they kind of took a gamble. And they gambled, and it was half a millimeter difference, like the thickness of
your ID.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, rules are rules, and that's what it is. But,
Right. This is the second time that Lewis and Charles have been disqualified together. We were there for the other one in October 2023 in the U.S. in Austin.
And that was a bummer.
And that was a bummer because they were both, great races too from both of them, and they got disqualified. And I was like, this has to be a joke. So when I woke up to the notification that they were both disqualified, I'm like, this has to be a joke. Yeah. So obviously both Ferrari drivers out for the weekend, just like detrimental to their team points. I mean, not a great race overall. They definitely would want to be on the podium, but to not score any points.
Yeah, and I think that puts them on the back foot for the rest of the season.
It does.
I think now a little luck has to come back their way. I think we need to see some other teams either.
I mean, I think the capability's there. They definitely had the biggest issue when it came to tire wear. So I think that's why they struggled. Obviously Lewis was like, he did the 2-stop strategy. It didn't really work at first. And then he was obviously coming back on Charles.
Yeah, but we just ran out of time, ran out of laps. There just wasn't enough tire degradation on the hard tire.
Yes.
for a new set of hards or a new set of mediums or whatever you were going to get onto to hard you up.
The hards were the tire.
The hards were the tire, and they're holding on. And so I even heard the commentator say that, like, what if they would have went like one step higher on the whole entire range? Because you know what I mean? Like they were on like, these 3 tires instead of those 3, they shifted it up 1 or 2. It would have been a for sure one stop, and it could have been a totally different scenario too. So we were totally different winners, So I think there's all kinds of options, and that's what the cool thing is about some of these tires and the way they do it is, they're trying to figure it out still early in the season.
Yeah, there's a lot to come. I think it's hard to stay positive after a weekend where both the drivers of the team that you follow, of course, is disqualified, and you're like, oh my God. But also, at the end of the day, we've seen crazier stuff happen. We've seen championships swing pretty significantly. There's going to be upgrades coming. I actually think Ferrari's bringing upgrades to Suzuka, and I think at the end of the day, like we're gonna see some things shake up. So Ferrari fans, let's not get down. I think the positive thing is Lewis won the sprint race. That was great. Good to see him in the front. Had a great significant gap to Oscar too in P2. But yeah, more to come on that.
Yeah, and there was some cool moments in the sprint where there was a couple times where people were in DRS range.
Yes.
And I was thinking there was going to be some good overtakes, but I feel like they during the sprint race, especially they ran out, the mediums kind of like ran out on any car that was in turbulent air.
Right.
And I think they were just getting overheated, but it kind of was looking like a good race.
Yeah.
There were some moments. Another thing I want to kind of bring up is the Racing Bulls front wing.
The Racing Bulls strategy, and then the Racing Bulls decided to do the 2-stop.
Yeah,
not great. And then Yuki Tsunoda's wing just decided to fall apart,
implode.
We don't know.
It was kind of weird. They just showed it. It was kind of he was going
like no contact, nothing.
So no contact. There definitely is. At the end of the straight, the car was probably under full load from being at full speed, and all of a sudden just failure. And it was I don't think, I've seen things fail before, but I've never seen a wing fail like that on an F1 car, and at least in a long
without something. And I think the biggest bummer of the weekend is we're going into it. Both Racing Bulls get into Q3, set themselves up, great qualifying in the sprint, too. But then it's like they end up not scoring points.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, the stroke of luck that's happening. But I feel like we're seeing, Yuki, and I hate to keep saying it, but we're seeing Yuki at his peak. But also Isaac was the best rookie, essentially, from a qualifying perspective, both weekends.
Yeah, his averages are really good.
Yeah.
And that's great to see. Like, even, all of these rookies, for most part, the top 3 of them, they're all doing really well. They're all fitting in the top 3 of them.
Yeah. But you would think Antonelli would be the front runner from a rookie perspective for everything because he's at a top team.
But he's got the biggest probably weight on his shoulders being in the top tier team, where like Ollie Behrman being in Haas, like there's a little bit more of a lenience because he's in a car that's not going to be at the front of the field.
Right.
Sure. Jack Dillon or
Doing,
thank you, is also not a top car, so he's getting a little bit more freedom and relent, So there's a little bit of issue for each of the drivers too.
I don't think we've seen the best potential or the highest potential of Antonelli yet, because apparently his car, he picked up some damage at the beginning of the race. And that's, he started P8, he finished P8, didn't see a whole lot. And then same thing in Australia, he picked up, obviously, damage going over the gravel, and he was out in Q1. So
he was somehow driver of the day.
I know, driver of the day.
And you said Toto Wolff said.
Well, because he was like, all right, on the radio, Kimmy, you're driver of the day. And he goes, really? And Toto's like, I know, weird, right? And he's or something, and he goes, I think it's because of your demographic and your good looks.
Yeah, so he probably ages
16 to 18.
Yeah.
So who knows? If I had to choose driver of the day while we're chatting about it, I mean, I think Kimmy had a great race yesterday. If I had to choose, probably yesterday.
Yeah.
If it wasn't Lewis being dominant, I would say Antonelli had the most overtakes. So I think he had a great race for the sprint. Maybe that's how they tied in the whole weekend. I'm not sure. But I feel like Behrman had a great race today.
I mean,
Ciao.
he said it twice.
Yes. And then he was like sad after, like apologized for saying it. He like felt bad.
The guy shouldn't have said that. I was being cocky, being arrogant. Yeah, sure.
But he felt good. He was like, listen, the car felt great. Like, you know, he was doing all these. It's a confidence booster for him after a crappy weekend to start off his Formula One career. I mean, I know he had a couple races last year, but really true his first season.
Yeah.
You know, it was not great in Australia. So good to see that. If I had to choose, I would say him. I would say Piastri, like, you know, too, really dominant, great from start to finish, great qualifying. He had a great overtake yesterday on Max in the sprint race. So it's like, you know, I think it was unusual to see Kimi. Not really sure what happened, but hey, he's new to Formula One. Maybe, you know, the fans, they like to speak.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's fan base. It's all favoritism on that end anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine would probably go to Piastri just because he was very dominant and held the race the whole entire time. There was no question at all for it. So that's kind of who my driver goes to for the day. I guess we've talked about a lot here in a short period of time. We kind of short and sweet this time. I think we've said a lot. I don't know what else I got.
I want to talk about Liam Lawson.
Let's talk a little bit more about Liam Lawson then.
I think everybody wants to talk about Liam Lawson.
Okay, you're right. So I'll ask the question then. How many more races does he have?
Well, the rumor in the paddock is that he's as soon as Japan going to be replaced. So as soon as the next race.
The next race.
Yuki was asked, would you, you know, take the Red Bull seat if you were asked to step up? And he said, I would. It's the faster car. Now, listen, I have a lot of feelings. I think Liam did great at Racing Bulls, AlphaTauri, whatever it was called last year, Visa Cash App, whatever. I feel like their name has changed so much.
It has.
I think he did great last year. I think Yuki, and I've said it, and I'll say it again.
Say it again then.
Yuki has out qualified him. He's out, you know, he's beat him in all the races. He's beat him.
I think he's proved himself
since he's been at Red Bull.
He also has new management now.
What did Matt at P1 say? Like, let's just get a conveyor belt of drivers to just go to the second seat. I thought that was a great way. I mean, that's essentially what Red Bull does anyways.
I mean, then that's the thing is, like, I don't want to say too much about Isaac. I can never say his name.
Isaac Hadjar.
Sorry, thank you.
Yes.
You know, that's the thing is, like, they are just a conveyor belt, and it is kind of like...
In 2 races at Red Bull, when we know Max is struggling with the car, to have your new driver and to give up on them, or to already be making comments to a place where the media can misconstrue it and start that conversation isn't great.
Right. And you heard even Max kind of even said that if Liam was in the other car,
he would be going faster.
Going faster because Max believes that the other car is better suited for other people, I would say.
I would say yes. I mean, it seems...
I mean, Max is struggling with the car too, though. It's not perfectly made for
Max
him.
is struggling with the car, but he's, I mean, like anything, he's making do with what is necessary and still performing well. But I think that's the kind of driver Max is.
He's a top tier. He's one of the one. He's, you know, in the there's 20 top drivers that can race in Formula One. He's the top 3 or top 1 right now, top 2. So yeah, he's the top of the top. He's the 1% of the 1%.
It's probably stressful, number 1, to be going against Max, but number 2, like, the car just, it doesn't seem linked up as it has been in the past historically. And I mean, we heard Checo last season talking about how, like, the car is just not made for anybody other than Max. And so I think that's the challenge with Red Bull, is that they definitely suit the car to their number 1 driver.
Since I've heard, and I think I even said it on the last podcast, is that you know, Liam Lawson has a somewhat similar driving style. However, it's just not as refined as Max's. You know, and we're seeing that.
Well, he has a lot to learn. I think that.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's cocky.
Yeah.
You know, very much so. I mean, you've talked about it previously as well. You know, yeah, he's got a lot to learn. You're right.
Well, he's here. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think it was probably a little bit premature, you know, like maybe getting a season under his belt. And now it's like, you know, we're hearing Helmut Marko like talk about, oh, well, Yuki's in like his finest form, like he's never performed better. And it's like, I don't really understand like how they made the decision.
I think there's just a lot of gaslighting over at that Red Bull camp.
I think there is. I think that like when I think about being at the Red Bull camp, I think about like a toxic relationship. Like I think about like it just not wanting to be there. Like, you know, if you're not winning, like you're already being discussed that you're being kicked out. Like and the conversations are already like being flowing from the top, like from people openly discussing, oh, you know, Isaac Hadjar shouldn't have been emotional. Like emotion isn't allowed in the sport. Like you shouldn't be able to be passionate about what you do, you know? And then, oh, he qualified P20. He should be getting kicked out. He should be demoted back down. Like, I mean, give the guy a chance. Like, granted, I agree, like, in my heart that I feel like Yuki should have been given an opportunity this year for the seat and see how it goes. Maybe it will happen. Maybe it won't. But after 2 races, like, we seriously should not be having a conversation around demoting a driver that's in a new team.
And this is his rookie year.
Okay. Lewis has
quasi-rookie.
Lewis has 9 points. He won the sprint race. He got 1 point in Australia and he got disqualified in Ferrari. Do you think that he should be fired? No. Like some of you may. But at the end of the day, I think that really doesn't go well. And I hope to God that the Red Bull camp does something to like get their arms around him and make him feel supported, other than making like out of pocket comments that other people are going to take one way and having these conversations. But
yeah.
Do I think that if he doesn't get it turned around in the next 2 races that there will be a bigger conversation? Absolutely. He may get demoted mid-season. That's what Red Bull does.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I totally see that happening within 6 races, 7 races.
Yeah.
Things don't really change by then. Then there's a different story and that's the time.
Absolutely. I agree.
But until then, I think you got to let him do his thing, let him learn, and learning the hard way. I mean, he's in the top tier team.
I mean,
car.
Yeah, I think it's tough. Yeah, he's in a top 4 car, and when you look at it in retrospect, Max, if he's qualifying P2, P3, P4, and Liam is qualifying P20, that's a problem.
Yeah, he needs to not be getting out in Q1.
I would say the majority of teams are relatively close when it comes to, you know, a couple of positions, you know, and that's about it. But there's definitely a large gap between those 2 teammates. And I think that's why it's the shocking, like, oh my God, like he's performing so poorly. And there's always a controversy around Red Bull's second seat.
I just think that's what they'll always have a controversy, just because of the way they manage their team. And maybe that's just the way they manage the whole entire thing, because they do more than just motor racing. They do all kinds of extreme sports and stuff. And from what I can maybe tell, if you're not the top guy in that skateboarding world, you're no longer a Red Bull fucking sponsored rider. You know what I mean? Maybe that's how they treat it too. So I think it's very cutthroat over there.
Yeah.
We'll see what changes. We'll see what happens. We got a lot more racing to come. We do have a week off in between right now in Japan.
Yep.
And then we're back for Japan. I know here in America, that means our race is on at 2 a.m. It's 1
a.m. Eastern Standard.
Yeah, so it's another late night like we talked about earlier, but that's okay. It is what it is. We're getting them over with, and then we're going to be on some normal times.
I do want to say, like, I just love going to Japan because I love seeing what the fans do. And
I think it's the whole Asian area
also the Chinese Grand Prix, like just the cool cutouts that they have. Like
they're like knockoff merch.
Yeah, like they have the coolest stuff. Like they have these little marionettes, the legs, the arms move, they dance, they do all sorts of stuff. I mean, in Japan, we've always seen the DRS hats that have literally working DRS. I need to learn how to do that.
I'm sorry, but the papaya.
Oh my God, the headband.
Literally a papaya.
Yes. There was, I don't know if anyone else caught it, but on the broadcast, obviously they cut to, so there's a huge Team LH section, as we know, on the straight, like a huge Team LH section.
He's he's won the most races there.
Yes. And right next to it was like Lando, McLaren, Oscar, and they had a couple women had a headband that literally had a papaya glued to it. And it was the funniest thing ever.
I thought that was really cool.
Creativity. I mean, it's so
through the roof.
It's so cool to see. That's what's amazing about Formula One is it's international. You get to see different culture. You get to see like different groups of fans and things that they do. So I always think it's so exciting to see that. And then Japan, you get to see the cherry blossoms this time of year. So it's always there's always a lot of cool shots of the cars in between the cherry blossoms. So looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too.
Yeah.
It's a good race. It's Suzuka. It's very much got history.
Yes.
And it should be a good race. We'll see what happens. I'm excited. I think that's all we got. We kept it at a good time this time. I tried to keep it under an hour like we promised. Anything else, Eileen?
No, that's it.
Okay. Thank you for listening. If you made it this far, if you do, please like, subscribe, whatever it is you do, comment, tell us what you guys thought of the weekend. Tell us who you guys' favorite driver, whatever it is. We're here down to here. We want to communicate.
Unless if you want us to take the Ferrari flag down.
Yeah. But I guess that's it. Until next time, we'll see you guys later. See ya.